Lunch break of day 20 of the Undercover Policing Inquiry. We've been listening to the live evidence of Helen Steel. It's the second day she's been given evidence. We've mostly been hearing about Debenhams, though there have been a few other topics that have been covered. I'm joined with Kate Wilson, who is another core participant, who was, like Helen, deceived into a long-term mental relationship by an undercover police officer. Kate, what do you think of the evidence today so far?
Well, first of all, it's really weird being here because I've been following it all like on video online, and I've kind of assumed it was a movie set, really. And so now I'm like, oh wow, there's a real building. You can't see as much as I would have liked. Quite high. Helen's on a screen, but Mitting's there at the back behind a whole load of computer screens, so it's hard to see his reactions. The thing that struck me most was it's been some of the most antagonistic questioning that I've seen. They were really pushing hard on stuff that Helen is saying now to the inquiry, which she didn't say when she was interviewed by Operation Sparkler. Although I have to say, because I've seen a few of these Sparkler interviews, their note-taking was appalling. I mean, a lot of it is just completely incomprehensible, and it's hard to consider how these were ever supposed to be proper interviews. So it's not actually clear really what was said, what wasn't said. But Helen very sensibly made the point that at the time she was reeling from all of the discoveries and was sat in a police interview about some very serious stuff that happened a very long time ago, and she wasn't going to name people who had not been arrested at the time. That's just not what you do.
There was a really sort of she had to explain, because of my experience, I don't really have any faith in the police. It's like, no shit. So I thought some of it was quite disrespectful. We had one section where we were shown a report about some meetings where Helen wasn't listed as attending. She said she wasn't there. Bob Lambert has subsequently said she definitely wasn't there. And Emma Gargett went, let's just see if any of it jogs your memory, though. And it's like, what? That just seems such a waste of time.
Well, I mean, I think part of the thing here is the fact that it's become clear over the last couple of weeks of evidence that Lambert used names fairly randomly in his reporting, and that the people that he lists as being present aren't necessarily the people who were there, and often he lists other people as being present rather than himself. So I think they do kind of have to look a bit at that, but it was obviously this is a really big deal. The idea that one of these spy cops actually went and planted an incendiary device in a department store causing £340,000 worth of damage is a really big deal, and they do have to take it seriously. And it does look like he used Helen to cover his role. So I can understand that they do have to investigate that properly. I mean, I thought Helen was very good and very clear. The things that she's 100% sure this is how it happened, and the things that she's like, I just don't really remember. I mean,
there was this whole thing of Bob Lambert inserting other people's names into things. I mean, so we saw it on Wednesday where he claimed that she'd organised some transport, and she was like, no, that's what he did, I don't even drive.
That's what I thought. I wasn't sure whether she did, but I was like, I have never seen Helen drive a car, and I've known her for 20 years or something like.
But I thought today's one was even more wild. It was that that she had designed the flyer for a conflict gig at the Electric Ballroom, and it's like, Helen doesn't do graphic design either, and particularly, I mean, this was quite a high-profile benefit gig for the ALF supporters group. Conflict were at that time, an anarcho-punk gig flyer for a gig like that would have been something that somebody who was really involved in the anarcho-punk scene would have produced. It's just really odd that she was being named as having done it, and I think it's through these like ridiculous lies that you really see how much of what Lambert's reports were total lies, because why is he lying about these so minor things,
Yeah, I mean, it is odd. And there's also, I mean, one of the things that has struck me from the reporting that we've seen from Bob Lambert is how vague a lot of it is. It's very difficult, like 40 years after the event, to kind of pin stuff down. And so you've got a few examples where people are quite clearly able to say, well, no, that wasn't me, but also that was Bob Lambert. But then there's a whole kind of raft of just vague accusations and references to people doing stuff that may well also have been Bob Lambert. And then the other thing that I think we've been seeing is that there seems to be a fair bit of reporting that's just filling a void. That maybe there wasn't actually that much going on. There wasn't that much. And so he's also making stuff up. And we saw that with HN85, Roger Thorley, that basically the spy cops that did really well were the ones who were good fiction writers, essentially. Well, I say good fiction writers. None of them were actually good. Having glanced at their books, they're not actually good fiction writers, but the ones that did use creative, artistic license in their intelligence reporting, which obviously is not good. I mean, I'm not part of the intelligence community, but I'm pretty sure that is not the job description.
Right. I mean, also in Lambert's case, during this time period, he's having two relationships whilst undercover with Belinda Harvey and Jackie, neither of which he's reporting on, both of whom he's spending multiple times a week with. So, I mean, the idea that he'd have any time to do to find anything else to report on, so he had to make stuff up, use the intelligence that he did have. He had to drip feed to his managers. No wonder that they're full of lies.
So this drip feeding thing is going to be particularly interesting around the Debenhams incident, because the evidence is that he knew all about it from very early on, and that's evidence coming from people who admit to having been involved, but also it seems like he was talking about it to people like Belinda and people like Jackie that had nothing to do with anything. I mean, and this is a point that Helen's made a few times, that only someone like Lambert, who had no fear of any kind of reprisals for what he was doing because he effectively had immunity because he was a cop, would have been having those conversations with people. But the fact that he was talking to people who were not at all involved, lots of people knew that he was involved. It sounds like Jackie's neighbour was in some way aware that he had been involved. And he wasn't. I mean, there's no detailed reporting prior to the Debenhams action. There's no detailed reporting that has been disclosed. Of course, that doesn't mean there wasn't any made. There was a bunch of CCTV footage from the Harrow store that we know Special Branch disappeared. It's not inconceivable that Lambert actually was reporting on the Debenhams action before it happened, and that was also disappeared after the event. So it's not actually conclusive of anything, really. I mean, if we know that they were disappearing evidence, then it makes sense that if he had provided detailed reports of having been from inside the cell, that they may have disappeared as well. But yeah, this question of the accuracy and the detail and the content and the drip feeding of his reporting around it is something that I think, it's really the only contemporary record. Like, people are doing their best to remember stuff that happened 40 years ago, but what is written in those reports, and I think that there's going to have to be a bit of a forensic examination of what he was saying when and how he knew that information and where he could possibly have got that information from. That is going to be quite, and I think it's going to be quite complex to follow. But I think that's going to be quite important in establishing that really he must have been involved, because otherwise how would he have known the stuff that he was reporting when he knew it?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, on another topic, we had a whole bunch of questions earlier on that were about the convictions of Ronnie Lee and Viv Smith. And there was a bunch of questions from Emma Gargater that really suggested she really didn't know the facts of the case. She didn't understand that it was that neither of these people were accused of doing any sort of direct action. And it's something I think where the inquiry is really failing, is that we see very little, apart from exhibits that are brought by witnesses to go into the witness pack. We don't see any other contemporaneous documents being used. They're trying to piece together what actually happened from these police reports, which is the worst possible piece of documentation to use for it. I mean, it is quite frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite significant, this thing about Ronnie Lee and Viv Smith, because they're using it as this kind of, the ALF supporters group was actually the ALF, and they're using this example that people were convicted for conspiracy who were from the ALF supporters group openly and were not from the ALF. And there's a very key fact which Helen did raise, and I don't know if it wasn't really clear whether they'd actually picked up on it, was they were arrested and charged with being from the ALF for doing what the ALF supporters group did. It's not that they were the ALF supporters group and they also. It's that they were charged for reporting actions that the ALF had done, as though that were being part of those actions. And as far as I'm aware, I mean, I was never involved in animal rights, and I don't know that much about it, and a lot of what I know comes from the news reporting, and I'm discovering that actually it's all quite inaccurate. But I'm learning a lot about kind of animal rights stuff. I was quite young in the early 80s, and by the time I got involved in politics, animal rights had quite a bad reputation because of the way that the ALF was smeared. Even my understanding from that kind of fairly ill-informed position was that you wouldn't be involved in ALF actions if you were part of the ALF supporters group, because it would be stupid, because you had your head well above the parapet. Everyone knew who you were. If you were doing press and reporting about ALF actions, you really wouldn't have been involved. Like just from a basic kind of personal safety point of view, if you were doing that kind of thing, you didn't want to be the face of reporting about it. So it really was a group of people who were supporters, and some of those people may well have done actions in the past, but they wouldn't have been doing them at the time. And I think this is something that we're seeing more and more. These days, you can be arrested and tried for posting something on social media as though that were you doing the action, and that's basically what we're seeing here. Back in the day when social media was a facsimile photocopied sheet made from cut and paste or whatever, cut and paste literally with scissors and glue, but what they were doing was reporting on stuff, and that was considered that was then turned into a criminal offence in itself. There's many examples we see of this. I mean, I have been threatened with arrest for people trafficking for doing migrant support work, and people have been arrested for reporting on stuff as though that makes them part of that action. I mean, it's complicated, but I think it's very clear that the ALF supporters group was not the ALF, and Lambert was reporting on it as though it was, basically to justify some of the stuff that he was doing.
Yeah, I mean, the fact we're on week 5 of this tranche, where this phase of the tranche, where this has been a topic since day one of this phase, and it appears the inquiry don't quite get it, is somewhat frustrating. We're on the lunch break. We haven't got that long for lunch. I'd like to go and get something to eat. We will be back this afternoon. It's only going to be a short session this afternoon, but we'll do another recap afterwards. There will be a Twitter Spaces at some point this evening. Please join us for that. Cheers for now.